Welcome to Communicate to Lead, the podcast that empowers leaders and aspiring leaders to communicate with clarity and impact. I'm Keely Belton, CEO and successful entrepreneur, and your host for today. I'm here to equip you with all the essential tools and strategies to master effective communication and lead your team to success. As the founder and CEO of The Tailored Approach, my goal is to empower you to be the best leader you can be. So sit back, relax, and join me in today's episode as we dive into the art of communicating like a true leader.
You know that sinking feeling when you see their name pop up on your calendar? That colleague who sucks the energy out of every room, or the boss who turns every conversation into a criticism session. Your heart rate spikes, your jaw clenches, and you are already mentally rehearsing your defense before they even start talking. Maybe it's the team member who complains about everything, the manager who interrupts you mid-sentence, or that person who somehow makes every conversation about their drama. And here's what happens. You walk away from these interactions feeling completely drained, questioning yourself, and sometimes even snapping at people you actually like. What if I told you that the solution isn't avoiding them or fighting back? It's actually learning to listen to them in a completely different way. Welcome back to Communicate to Lead. I'm Keely Belton, your communication and leadership coach, and I help women leaders build the skills they need to lead with confidence and authenticity. Today, we're discussing a topic that affects every single one of us: how to handle difficult people without losing your composure. If you listened to episode 27 back in the day, you learned the fundamentals of active listening, how to be present, ask effective questions, and build stronger relationships through improved listening skills. This episode is different. This is about how to listen when you really don't want to, when someone is pushing every button you have, when you'd rather hide in the bathroom than have another conversation with them, and when listening feels like the last thing you're capable of doing. I'm going to show you how strategic listening, not the kind where you grit your teeth and endure, can actually protect your energy while improving these challenging relationships. Here's what we'll cover: the psychology behind why certain people trigger us so intensely, the 3 ways we typically listen to difficult people that actually make things worse, and 4 research-backed strategies that will change how you handle these interactions forever. Plus, I'll give you specific techniques for dealing with chronic complainers, serial interrupters, and emotional hijackers. Let me start with something that might surprise you. That overwhelming feeling you get around certain people isn't just in your head. There's actual science behind it. Researchers like Elaine Hatfield have studied a phenomenon known as emotional contagion, which reveals that we can literally catch emotions from others within milliseconds. When someone walks into your office radiating anxiety, frustration, or negativity, your brain starts mirroring those emotions before you even realize what's happening. Think about it. You've probably experienced this. You're having a perfectly fine day. Then you have a 5-minute conversation with that one person, and suddenly you feel agitated for the rest of the afternoon. That's emotional contagion in action. There's another piece to this puzzle. Our brains have what psychologists call a negativity bias. We are wired to pay more attention to negative information because, from a survival standpoint, it kept us alive. So when someone is being critical, pessimistic, or dramatic, our brain treats it like a potential threat and triggers our fight or flight response. This is why listening to difficult people feels so exhausting. Your nervous system is literally preparing for battle, even if you're sitting in a conference room talking about quarterly reports. Understanding this changes everything, because now you know it's not a character flaw that certain people get under your skin. It's biology. And once you understand the mechanism, you can work with it instead of against it. Before we get into the solutions, let's discuss how most of us typically handle these situations, because recognizing your pattern is the first step toward changing it. In my coaching work, I've observed that most of us fall into one of three patterns when confronted with difficult people. The defensive listener is the most common response. This is when you are already formulating your response before they finish speaking. Your internal monologue sounds like, "That's not true. They're being ridiculous. I need to correct this." The problem is that when you are in a defensive mode, you are no longer actually listening. You're just waiting for your turn to argue, which usually escalates the situation. The second response is the shutdown listener, which is the opposite extreme. This is when you mentally check out to protect yourself. You nod along, you say at appropriate intervals, but you have essentially left the building. While this might feel safer in the moment, it often leads to misunderstandings and can make the other person even more frustrated because they sense that you are not really present. And then finally, the absorber listener takes on all their emotions and energy. You are listening intently, but you are also absorbing their stress, their complaints, their negativity, like an emotional sponge. These are often the people who leave difficult conversations feeling completely drained and questioning their own reality. Here's the thing though, I've been all three of these listeners at different points in my career, and none of them actually solves the problem. They either make the situation worse or leave you feeling terrible afterward. But there is a better way to listen that changes everything. Let me share 4 strategies that will completely transform how you handle these challenging conversations. The first strategy is what I call the circuit breaker technique, which is based on research in emotional regulation. The goal is to interrupt the emotional contagion cycle before it takes over. And here's how it works. The moment you feel that familiar spike of tension, your shoulders tightening, your jaw clenching, that internal "here we go again" feeling, you're going to use box breathing, which is essentially a 4-second breathing reset. You breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, hold that for 4 seconds before breathing in again for 4 seconds. This literally activates your parasympathetic nervous system and interrupts the fight or flight response. While you're doing this, you're going to use what psychologists call mental labeling. You'll say to yourself, "This is their anxiety, not mine," or "This is their frustration, not mine." It sounds simple, but this creates psychological distance and reminds your brain that you don't have to take on their emotional state. If you are sitting down, place your feet flat on the floor and feel the connection with the ground. If you're standing, notice the position of your feet in your shoes. This grounding technique keeps you present in your own body rather than getting swept away by their energy. Let me give you an example of what this looks like in practice. Let's say your colleague Mark starts his usual complaint about how nothing ever works around here. Instead of tensing up and preparing your defense, you take that 4-second breath and think, "This is Mark's frustration, not mine." You ground yourself and listen from a place of curiosity rather than defensiveness. The second strategy originated from Marshall Rosenberg's research on nonviolent communication, focusing on listening for the underlying need behind a person's behavior. Most difficult behaviors stem from unmet needs. Individuals might need to feel heard, valued, safe, or in control. When you can identify the underlying need, you can respond to that instead of just reacting to the behavior. Here's a message template that works really, really well. It sounds like you're concerned about, and then reflect what you think the underlying concern might be. Let me show you what this looks like. Your boss, Michelle, comes to you and says, "This project is a disaster. The timeline is unrealistic. The team isn't communicating, and I don't think we're going to make the deadline." Instead of getting defensive about your project management, you might say, "It sounds like you're concerned about ensuring we deliver quality work on time. Help me understand what specific areas feel most at risk to you." Notice what happened there. You acknowledge her underlying need to feel confident about project success without agreeing that everything is a disaster. You validated the concern while staying calm and gathering more information. This approach works because when people feel heard at the need level, they often become much less reactive. They are not difficult because they enjoy being difficult. Contrary to popular belief, they are usually difficult because they don't feel heard or understood. The third strategy draws from mindfulness research and cognitive behavioral therapy. So it's such a tongue twister. And I refer to it as activating your observer self. This is about creating psychological distance while staying present in the conversation. Reminder, it's your observer self. So instead of getting emotionally entangled, you listen like an anthropologist studying interesting human behavior. Your internal script becomes, this is fascinating data about this person, or I wonder what's driving this reaction. That doesn't mean you become cold or detached. You're still engaged and responsive, but you are observing the interaction from a slight emotional distance. You are studying the pattern, the triggers, the underlying dynamics, rather than taking everything personally. I had a client who used this technique with her micromanaging boss. Instead of feeling frustrated every time he checked in for the third time that day, she started observing his behavior with curiosity. She realized his micromanaging consistently increased before board meetings, which helped her understand that it was driven by his own anxiety, not a lack of trust in her work. This shift in perspective completely changed how she responded to him. When you listen from your observer self, you can stay present without absorbing their emotional state. You become like a skilled therapist, deeply engaged but not personally affected by the content. The fourth strategy is based on research about workplace emotional labor, and it involves learning to listen fully without taking responsibility for others' emotions. Here's what I mean. You can be completely present and engaged in the conversation while maintaining clear boundaries about whose emotions belong to whom. Their anger, frustration, or anxiety is theirs to manage, not yours to fix or absorb. One technique that works incredibly well is what I call the mental boundary technique. As you are listening, consciously remind yourself that their emotional reaction belongs to them, not to you. And think of it this way, if someone threw a ball at you, you wouldn't automatically catch it just because they threw it. You can choose whether to catch it or let it bounce off. The same principle applies to emotions. You can acknowledge their feelings without taking ownership of them. After difficult conversations, you need a post-conversation emotional reset ritual. Now, I don't mean to be woo, but this might involve taking a short walk to physically move your body, practicing deep breathing, or listening to a song that shifts your mood. The key is having a consistent way to transition back to your own emotional state consciously. Let me give you an example. Your team member, Jessica, comes to you upset about a decision leadership made. She's venting about how unfair it is and how stressed she feels. You can listen compassionately, validate her emotions, and offer support without taking on her stress as your own. You might say, I can see this decision is really affecting you. What kind of support would be most helpful right now? You are being a good leader and colleague without becoming her emotional caretaker. Now, let's talk about how to apply these 4 strategies to specific types of challenging people you're likely to encounter, and we all have. The first one is the chronic complainer. This is the person who seems to find fault with everything and turns every conversation into a list of grievances. We all know this person. Every conversation becomes a litany of everything that's wrong, unfair, or broken. The mistake most people make is trying to argue with the complaints or offer solutions, which usually just leads to more complaining. Here's what to do instead. Acknowledge what they're feeling without agreeing with their assessment. You might say, that sounds frustrating. What would the ideal situation look like to you? Or, I can hear how much this is bothering you. If you could wave a magic wand and fix this, what would change? This technique does 2 things. It validates their feelings, which often reduces the intensity, and it redirects their focus from problems to solutions. You're not agreeing that everything is terrible, but you're acknowledging that they are experiencing frustration. The second type of difficult people, I call the interruption machine. Some people interrupt consistently. They finish your sentences, cut you off mid-thought, or start talking before you are done. This often comes from anxiety or excitement rather than rudeness, but it's still incredibly frustrating to deal with. Here's the bridge back technique. When they interrupt, don't fight for airtime in the moment. Let them finish their thought. Then say something like, "That's an interesting point. Let me finish the thought I was sharing, and then I'd love to hear more about your perspective." Then continue where you left off. This approach acknowledges what they said without reinforcing the interrupting behavior. You are training that interrupting doesn't move the conversation forward faster. The third difficult person is the emotional hijacker. This is the person who turns every conversation into an emotional dumping session. They might share way too much personal information, expect you to solve their problems, or become dramatically upset about minor issues. The key here is listening without becoming their therapist. You can be compassionate while maintaining professional boundaries. You might say, "It sounds like you're dealing with a lot right now. Have you been able to talk to anyone about this?" Or, "That sounds challenging. What resources do you have available to help you work through this?" You are acknowledging their feelings without taking responsibility for managing them. You're also gently redirecting them towards appropriate support systems. And then finally, we have the recovery protocol. Even with these strategies, difficult conversations can still be draining. Having a recovery protocol is essential for protecting your long-term well-being. Immediately after a challenging interaction, give yourself 5 minutes to reset and regain your composure. This might involve stepping outside for fresh air, getting a drink of water, or listening to a song that lifts your mood. The goal is to transition back to your emotional state consciously. One thing that's really important to remember is how someone treats you is information about them, not about you. When someone is consistently challenging, critical, or negative, it's telling you something about their internal state, stress level, and coping mechanism. It's not a reflection of your worth or competence. Building resilience for these interactions is like building physical muscle. The more you practice these listening strategies, the less these conversations will affect you. You'll start to notice patterns, predict triggers, and respond from a place of choice rather than reaction. Now that you have these 4 strategies and specific techniques for dealing with different types of difficult people, let's see how they work together in a real-world workplace scenario. Let's say you're in a meeting with Tom, who has a reputation for being negative and critical. He starts complaining about the new software implementation, saying it's a waste of time and money. The old you might have gotten defensive and started listing all the benefits of the new system. The new you, however, takes a 4-second breath, reminds yourself this is Tom's frustration, not mine, and listens for the need behind the complaint. You might say, "It sounds like you're concerned about how this change will affect productivity. What specific aspects of the transition feel most challenging to you?" You are listening from your observer self, gathering information rather than observing his negativity. Tom explains that he's worried about the learning curve and whether his team will be able to keep up with their current workload during the transition. Now you have a more productive conversation about legitimate concerns rather than debating whether change is good or bad. You acknowledge his concerns, provide relevant information, and discuss potential solutions. At the end of the conversation, take 5 minutes to transition back to your own emotional state. This is the difference between surviving difficult conversations and transforming them into opportunities for better understanding and stronger relationships. As we wrap up today, here's what I encourage you to try this week. Think of one person you find consistently challenging to interact with. Before your next conversation with them, decide which of these strategies you're going to practice. Start with a circuit breaker if you tend to get emotionally reactive. Try listening for the need behind the noise if you usually get caught up in defending against their complaints. Experiment with your observer self if you typically absorb the emotions of others. Pay attention to how different your experience is when you approach the conversation with intention rather than just hoping for the best. Notice how your energy feels before, during, and after the interaction. Remember, the goal isn't to change difficult people. That's not your job, and it's usually not possible anyway. The goal is to protect your own well-being while maintaining professional relationships and finding ways to make these interactions more productive and effective. You have more control over these situations than you think, my friend. It's not about having perfect conversations with everyone. It's about staying centered in your own emotional space while still being present and engaged with others. These listening strategies aren't just about managing difficult people. They also help you understand others more effectively. They are about becoming the kind of leader who can stay calm and thoughtful under pressure, who can find common ground in challenging situations, and who can maintain her own well-being while supporting others. That's leadership that makes a difference. If you need additional support in practicing this new way of listening or leading, I'd be so happy to help. You can book a complimentary clarity call with me. The scheduling link is in the show notes. We can discuss your specific challenges and create a tailored plan that suits your situation. Thank you so much for tuning in to Communicate to Lead. Until next Thursday, my friend, I am Keely, reminding you that great communication is the foundation of inspiring leadership. Keep learning, keep growing, and remember to communicate to lead.